Welcome, PPL students. Let's dive right into this explainer and completely decode the aerodynamics of ground effect so you can absolutely master your upcoming ground school exam. So, are you ready to absolutely crush that ground exam? I know you are. I was actually going to tell a joke about ground effect to kick things off, but I was worried it would just go right under your wings. Okay, groan if you must, but let's get focused. Here's our flight plan for today. First up, what is ground effect? Then we'll look at the physics of drag, followed by the wingspan height roll. After that, we'll cover takeoff hazards and traps, and finally, the landing float. Let's get to it. Section 1. What is ground effect? All right, so the formal definition you absolutely need to memorize for the test is that ground effect is the interference of the ground or water surface with the airflow patterns about the aircraft in flight. But, practically speaking, this aerodynamic interference actually lets your aircraft fly just clear of the surface at a slightly slower airspeed than you'd normally need. It's kind of like you're riding on a giant cushion of trapped air. Now you might be wondering why this actually happens mechanically. Well, simply being that close to the ground physically restricts the vertical airflow around your plane. This barrier reduces the wing's upwash and downwash, and it significantly cuts down on the generation of those massive wingtip vortices. Because those vortices are blocked from fully forming, it completely alters your span-wise lift distribution. Basically, the whole airflow pattern around your wing gets a major shakeup. Moving right along, Section 2, the physics of drag. Take a look at this comparison. When you're in ground effect, you actually need a lower angle of attack, or AOA, to produce the exact same lift coefficient. Since your induced drag drops significantly, you need a much lower thrust setting at low speeds. But on the flip side, when you climb out of ground effect, you suddenly need a higher AOA to maintain that same lift, and a much higher thrust setting just to fight off the abruptly increased induced drag. And this brings us to a classic exam trick, the pitot-static trap. Since ground effect restricts downwash, it actually causes an increase in the local static pressure right around your aircraft's static port. This artificially higher pressure gives you a lower reading of both airspeed and altitude on your instruments. The huge danger here? You might actually be airborne at a lower indicated airspeed than normal, which could totally trick you into thinking you need to pitch down or change your configuration when you definitely shouldn't. Okay, Section 3, the wingspan height rule. So how close do you actually need to be for ground effect to really kick in? The math on this is super interesting. When you're at a height of 1 full wingspan off the ground, your induced drag is reduced by only 1.4%, so basically nothing. But drop your altitude down to a quarter of your wingspan, and suddenly you're getting a 23.5% reduction. Drop even further to 1/10 of your wingspan, and boom, a massive 47.6% reduction in induced drag. Seeing it laid out like this really hammers the point home, doesn't it? That first bar is just a tiny little sliver at one span. The second bar jumps up big time at a quarter span. And that third bar, it shows almost half of your induced drag just completely wiped out at 1/10 of a span. This is the big takeaway. That massive reduction in drag only happens when you are extremely close to the runway. That brings us to Section 4, takeoff hazards and traps. Taking off is hands down the most critical phase where ground effect can really bite you. Imagine the dangerous chain reaction if you leave ground effect prematurely. Step 1, you climb out of that nice cushion of air. Step 2, suddenly you need an immediate increase in AOA just to maintain your lift. Step 3, because of that higher AOA, you get hit with a massive surge in induced drag. And Step 4, you suffer a decrease in stability along with an unexpected nose-up change in your pitching moment. It is a highly, highly dangerous dynamic shift. In fact, your study materials specifically warn about this exact scenario. They say the aircraft may become airborne initially with a deficiency of speed and then settle back to the runway. Definitely memorize that phrase, deficiency of speed. It's a major exam buzzword. What happens is the reduced drag tricked you into flying way too early, and the second you climb out of ground effect, all that drag comes rushing back. The terrifying reality here is that your plane might literally just sink right back down onto the tarmac, or worse, into the trays at the end of the runway. Which brings us to a golden rule in aviation: never force the aircraft airborne. Always, always wait for the manufacturer's recommended takeoff speed to make sure you have adequate initial climb performance. Climbing out safely requires patience, and you really have to trust your airspeed indicators, rather than just relying on that feeling that your wheels are getting light. All right, last but not least, Section 5, the landing float.
Entering ground effect is basically the exact mirror image of leaving it. If you keep a constant AOA as you sink toward the runway, your lift coefficient actually increases on its own. The thrust you need to keep flying immediately drops because your induced drag is just vanishing, meaning your power-off deceleration is significantly reduced. Basically, your plane suddenly becomes highly aerodynamically efficient right at the exact moment you're trying to slow it down. And this dynamic is exactly what creates the infamous floating effect. Any excess speed at the point of flare is going to cause a considerable float distance down the runway. If you carry too much airspeed over the numbers, that sudden reduction in drag just makes the plane want to keep flying, and flying right on past your intended touchdown point. This is exactly why your power management is absolutely crucial here. A reduced power setting is completely necessary during those final phases of your approach. Otherwise, that reduced thrust requirement from entering ground effect will actually cause your aircraft to climb or balloon above your desired glide path, which is going to completely ruin your landing attempts. So let me leave you with this final thought. Ground effect gives you a really dangerous false sense of security on takeoff, but a stubborn refusal to sink on landing. So, which phase of flight will you respect more on your upcoming check ride? Think about that as you review your notes tonight. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If this helps clear up the aerodynamics of ground effect for you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more structured PPL ground school explainers. Keep studying, and I'll see you in the skies.